What's going on, Living Fit Show? This is your host, Jesse Grund here. And today's episode, we have the honor, nay, the privilege to be interviewing Miss Kelly Manzone. Kelly is a personal trainer, strength coach. She's an educator. She does some amazing work out there. If you ever have seen this random woman on social media, like swinging things that you didn't know could be swung around, that was most likely Kelly. But on top of all that, she also recently competed in a kettlebell sport meet. She's got so much to offer, so much education, and just really happy to have her on the show. Kelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jesse. My dog is going after the dishwasher because she wants a bone. I don't know if you could hear her. Could you hear her?
I can't hear her. No.
Ignore her right now.
Okay, I will. As long as we're not panning to like a dog, like inappropriately making like motions towards a stuffed animal, I think we're good. I think we'll be okay on YouTube. So Kelly and I are both assistant instructors for Stick Mobility. We've taught some online stuff together, but she's done so much more. She's up in the Connecticut area. Kelly, can you tell a little bit about what your journey has been in fitness and in strength, and how you are where you're sitting right now, surrounded by what you're surrounded by?
My living room.
Yeah, you're right.
All of my training tools. So I grew up here in Connecticut, and I've been a lifelong athlete. I started off with dance when I was about 3 years old. Danced till I was about 14, did gymnastics in between. Then in high school, I did softball. I was a pitcher, ran track, and then I threw the discus, and I was on the swim team. So I really like individual sports, and I love trying things outside of my comfort zone. How I got into the industry is I was in my early 20s and working out at a gym in Danbury, because I lived in Danbury at the time. And people would approach me in the weight room. I was one of the only women in the weight room. And during that time, I was going through a huge like calisthenics phase. So I was doing like 2-finger push-ups, all these like pull-ups, having a blast. But people thought I worked there. So I would get stopped and people would ask me questions. And I'm like, oh no, I don't work here. I'm just working out. Then when I moved to Orlando, not too long after, the same thing happened. I was working out at a gym and I got approached by a basketball coach. And he thought that I was in the business. And I said, no, I'm not. And then I was like, man, this keeps happening. I think I kind of found my calling. And so when I came back to Connecticut, I was 23 when I started in the industry. And I started at a local New York sports club. And I got a good base there, as a start and foundation. And it was about in 2006 is when I first touched a kettlebell. And then I think my fitness journey completely, the doors like open of like just the possibilities of where movement could take me professionally. And I really liked the tactility and dexterity of connecting with the kettlebell. And I got involved with Art of Strength, Anthony DeLugio. So a lot of like I have all of his like vintage equipment that he was selling at the time, like his kettlebells, my vintage dumbbell, my vintage barbells, the list goes on. And I kind of dove down the rabbit hole of, old time strength with strongman lifts and kind of exploring circular training. I had his Balavas, which were my first introduction to kind of the short steel mace around that time. And then I got pregnant, and around after I gave birth, I decided to leave corporate fitness. And I enjoyed it in the sense of like the people that I connected with, my clientele, the education that I got. But I felt like I didn't quite fit in the box, and I decided to strike out as an independent contractor, which I've been doing ever since. And about 6 years ago, I started, maybe a little over, I had people within the industry, trainers reaching out to me, asking me if I would do like workshops around, mace and stuff. And at first I kind of turned it down because I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And my husband's like, it's happened to you 3 times. I think you should start doing your own workshops and evolving. So that's how I started doing my own workshops, which has led me to traveling, around the country. And then through social media, I've been able to have like online options, in addition to working here in town, working with my everyday clientele. And most of the online people that I work with are fellow fitness professionals. Most that attend my workshops are probably like 80% fitness professionals, 20% general public. And I've been very fortunate to dive down the rabbit hole of things that interest me, as far as like training tools and historic practices from around the world, and implementing them into traditional, I hate using that word, but traditional strength training of what people would think. Because even though I have my home space, I do work at 2 gyms. I do, I guess, traditional strength training, my barbell work, and so I'm a little bit of a hybrid of everything, I guess you could say. It's
Yeah.
hard. Yeah, I can't describe.
I would say it's maybe just Western. I think maybe Western civilization training versus like the rest of the world, right? Where we kind of pigeonhole. It's like, it's not a dumbbell, it's not a machine, it's not a barbell. Don't lift it, like that sort of thing, right? You go to another country, and they're like, oh no, we do things with all different kinds of stuff here. Like whatever just makes you happy and makes you want to move. Like let's do it. Obviously, kettlebells originated in Russia.
Yep.
I think if I know their history correctly, they started as a crop tool that was so heavy, and then the strong men would actually come lift this massive crop tool, and everybody in town was like, "Wow, that's amazing! What can you do with that?" And thus kettlebells were born. But obviously, lots of people know about the kettlebell, and we'll get to the kettlebell a little bit more. But obviously, steel mace, gata, steel clubs, they're just now, I would say, entering the Western stream of like normal training. Like we're starting to see strength and conditioning practices that add them in.
Yes.
Why do you think it's taken so long? And B, do you see this as there's growth going on? There's more attention going on with this being added to what Gen Pop experience as normal fitness?
I think if you look in the realm of like especially the last like 5 to 6 years, I think a lot of it is media driven. So exposure. So but the implements of club training, and even like, mace training, is typically like wood or bamboo, and from ancient Persia, Iran, and India. And then from that inspired, Jake Shannon, was the first in the US to create the steel mace. So that is more of like a modern adaptation of the gatas that are typically seen in India. So I forgot your question now, sorry.
Well, no, it's totally good. I was really asking about like seeing it grow the way that it's growing. So attention is being brought to it, like you said, from a media perspective. But in addition, do you see this as the growth is going to continue? Because like I said, we're seeing it in the strength and conditioning world now. We're seeing like strength coaches programming some sort of steel mace work into programming on, maybe not non-lifting days. Like it's becoming more mainstream. Indian clubs are all over Gray Cook's and FMS's page. Like you see them all over the place. So
I recently worked with the farm team for the New York Rangers, the Hartford Wolfpack here, and doing stick mobility in Indian clubs. So there is definitely more of an interest in midline crossing patterns. And, I've connected with a couple of professional baseball players that swing clubs. So I think, when we in the strength world, or when you are working with a team, you tend to do like the patterns of hinge, push, pull, squat, but we also cross the midline, we also throw. And I think that's where these historical training practices fill in the gaps in maybe like a modern system. You get that dexterity and grip strength, which is obviously extremely important, not only for your heart health, but for your ability to, depending on your sport, to perform. And you light up both sides hemispheres of your brain when you're doing midline or asynchronous patterns. So there's a lot of benefits to the brain also. But with midline crossing, I feel like, you start to tap into, as you're aware of, rotational power, rotational strength, reflexive strength and control, which could lead to better performance. And I personally believe injury prevention. You get like your shoulders to be a little bit more resilient, tapping into all different planes of motion. So I definitely think it's going to continue. And it wasn't that long ago when you would walk into a gymnasium back in the day and there'd be a wall full of Indian clubs. That's starting to happen again. So I think, the bodybuilding phase kind of within that, Indian clubs was even an Olympic sport twice, so it's the bodybuilding phase maybe kind of dialed these things back. And then I think now there's been a push to bring them back into seeing their value.
Then so if you have a Gen Pop client that walks in and obviously they see your impressive collection, which we'll get to here in a second, and they're like, listen, I don't play a swing sport. What do I need to swing something for? Is it a lot of those things that you talk about? Is that your response to why they need to swing stuff? Or is there like a really like elevator speech for why you would encourage somebody who's Gen Pop, who doesn't swing a golf club, they don't swing a baseball bat, they don't swing a hockey stick, why this would be great for them?
I don't really have like something that I always say. I think it's very much connecting to the person on an individual level and based on what their interests are, what their needs are, and then also making it attainable. I realize that like if somebody sees this large drawer behind me and they see me swing it, they're like, that is not attainable. So you have to kind of say there's a start to the progress or beginning of the train tracks and just laying down the foundation. You start with an Indian club. I found in my general population clients are very diverse, but I also have like a lot of older clients, and I do train people, a lot of golfers and tennis players around here. And I created the Sturdy Athlete program using stick mobility and Indian clubs, but it was also, to bring people to become a little bit more resilient. If I wanted to, if somebody's cycling in and out of PT and, they're having shoulder issues or, issues with tendonitis, I feel like these tools in combination with a general strength training could help make them a little bit more resilient, get them out of the cycle of PT, but also the connecting to your movement. I think oftentimes you talked about this before we went live about if it's working out or if it's training. And I think sometimes we don't often connect to the tools that we're using and we're just moving. And I find when you have a circular training tool, it becomes a seamless extension of you and you have to be present. So I try to just kind of bring it as a holistic approach and individualize it based on the person, because everybody's needs are different and they could start and then they could progress to, a different modality within that circular training family.
For those of you listening at home, the PT cycle, I'll explain that to you real quick. You start feeling bad, you go to PT helps you get out of your symptoms, they release you go back to doing all the things you were doing before, then you start to feel bad again, so you go back to PT, he makes your symptoms go away, you feel better, so you start going back to the things you were doing before, then you start feeling bad, go back to, that's the PT cycle. It's the definition of insanity. Yes. It's the definition of insanity. And that's, and to all our PTs who listen to this, that is not me cracking on the PTs, because I think there's some amazing PTs, we've had some on the show. I just also see that cycle occurs, and some of it's personal responsibility, some of it's the system that just needs to be fixed, and recognizing that we need to fix problems and not just symptoms. But that's neither here nor there. Here nor there. Yeah, exactly. We've had many a conversation about that, and we kind of, I think we're frontliners in that regard, where we're like, hey, let me get you out of that circle, get out of there. Yes. Okay, here we go. Let's do these things instead, and let's make you feel better, because that's what this is all about: is getting you better and feeling better. Absolutely. Not just feeling better. That's not the same thing. So, can you tell us a little bit? So, everybody gets to see everything behind you. So maybe you can introduce a couple of the modalities behind you so that you don't have to necessarily go over all of them. I want to start with the two very tall black objects behind you, because those are probably potent. Yeah, those are probably the first things people are seeing. They're like, what is that? Is that? And
these are thin jewelry. And I use the template from my mentor, Paul Taras, I can't even say Volkovinsky. I should know this by now. So Paul's in Australia, but he has mentored me over the past, I think like 6 years or so. And we connected through social media. He has traveled to India and Iran and trained in both the Akara and the Zircone. And he, a few years back, went in Varanasi, India. They have these jewelry swinging contests. And I am so grateful to him for mentoring me all these years. And when he put out these templates, I was like, I'm going to get a pair. So Tom Village, who is local, a friend of mine who I met through social media, he also has traveled to India, and actually with Paul, he found a local wood turner in Orange, Connecticut to turn these for us. So they did come out a little heavier than I had anticipated, and they're almost as tall as me. I'm 5'7", and they're chest height, and they're 26 pounds a piece. So they're 12.
Yeah.
I could get a couple reps with doubles, but that's an example of like trusting my foundation. So obviously, like, you don't just jump into swinging a club like that large. It
Right.
was very like progressive getting to that point.
Right.
But they have a lot of sentimental value to me. And, you know, since I was focusing on the last 7 months of kettlebell sport, I haven't been swinging the double jewelry in quite a while. I've been doing the single, which I've gotten, they're very comfortable single, but double is a different story because that counterbalance and just the sheer volume of like the size of that club on one side as you're trying to swing the other. But I'll master it at some point. I've gotten through that with doubles. That was like it. They weren't pretty, but I made it. But that's more of like my personal practice, my personal challenge. You know, my clients aren't touching these jewelry, but it's mainly for like my own experience and learning. And I like to, you know, kind of dive into the deep end of learning outside of the box. So this is something that I want it to be a lifelong.
There's no boxes behind you. Everything has some sort of curvature or circle to it. So there's no box. You don't have to worry about that. I have the same thing. I have a 35-pound steel mace in my studio, and people come in and see that. They're like, what do you do with that? I was like, I swing it. And I just start swinging it and doing things. And they're like, I was like, this is for me. I've been swinging something like a steel mace or a steel club for 6-7 years now. Like, you're not just going to be like, hey, give me that 35-pounder. I want to see what that works like all around me. It's not going to happen. Sorry, for those of you at home, I had to clear my throat. The wood pairs that are on your right and left shoulder, the little bit shorter. Yes, those run right there. Yes. No, you had the
Persian meal that are also Paul's template, and they actually have my name on it and his signature.
Oh.
He just turned me a beautiful pair that are almost done. He's just varnished them, and they're going to be 30 inches tall and 10 pounds a piece. These are Body Mind Fit. They're 12 and a half. But yeah, I think the Persian meal is one of my favorite practices. I love it. And it's the communication with the pinky underneath the pommel, the communication with the ring finger, the weight distribution. And I've been very fortunate to make some incredible friendships in Iran and have a lot of conversations and support from, Zircone athletes, and also the incredible women who recently did a Vice News documentary on how women would like to participate in the sport because they are not able to in Iran. Sure. And it's been a very interesting journey. And I've long believed that movement is its own language, and it could bridge the gap of people's differences and bring people together. And I feel very fortunate to enjoy the practice but also connect to the people that live there. It's awesome.
So obviously a lot of different tools. So we're going to talk to a little bit of the training at kettlebell sport that you did for the last 7 months leading into the competition that you just competed in, and would love to know how you did, by the way. But ultimately, like, when you're putting training together, and for those of you at home, training, working towards a specific goal, working out, just move your body. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes we need that. Sometimes you look at the training template, you're like, you know what? I just want to push a sled around for 30, 40 minutes. That's fine. That's working out. Okay. But ultimately, like, how do you see these things within a training program for yourself? So obviously you work out on your own.
Yep.
Most of the time, probably. I'm not sure if your husband is swinging these with you as well, but how do you incorporate these into a training program that you're putting together for somebody just to use them to get stronger? How do you incorporate them?
It depends. For myself, I program differently than if I'm working with a client, obviously.
Sure.
It depends on which modality. So if somebody is interested in blending a circular training tool into their current kind of workout routine or program, I pick the modality that is like most attainable for them at the time. So sometimes around here, it's easiest to start with an Indian club. This is affordable. It's easy to travel with, and it's a smaller lever. So you get the introduction to how to properly grip a club, how to the casting of where a club is supposed to be casted, and also tapping into those different ranges of motion under a lighter load as you build the foundation. So you're kind of priming your brain, priming the pattern, getting your body adapted. And typically from an Indian club, it will be some simple basic patterns that they could either use as a warm-up, as recovery, or on kind of like an accessory day. If it's within the session, it also depends if they want to go down the rabbit hole of sequencing, right? So if it's some people just want a couple of patterns, some people actually want to learn how to sequence. So there's a difference between the two, and then how you would program it. So sometimes it requires me on my end to do like, if it's sequencing, do a separate piece out of the program that is like follow along videos that they could do on their own time. So that's why everything is kind of individualized for that person. If it's going into, so I have a couple of the guys that I train that are golfers and tennis players, and they really like the mace. So we, do our stick mobility priming. So that's why I travel with as much as I can with stick mobility, to pair it with circular training, because I think it's a primer for irrigating the opening up the fascial lines and mobilizing the body before you swing. And it's also a great assessment to see if the person even has adequate mobility to even swing first. So I know I'm not exactly kind of answering the question per se, but it's mainly finding that what the right tool for the job, and then placing it into the program that meets their needs.
Sure. Makes sense. Just like regular programming. Do you program it just in circular motions, or do you add them to things like squats and lunges and stuff like that as like a little external load to manage in? Yeah.
So like, for some of my clients, like Fran, for example, like now that he's been with me for quite some time, and it's very comfortable with the gata. So I have a couple of the gatas for my workshops at the gym, and he'll swing squats, so 360 into squat. You could do your lunge variation. He loves the 10 and 2s, so you could introduce like what Paul has taught me, like a body turn. So you could do like a 360 or 180 body turn with the 10 and 2. So there's ways to progress that. Or they could even vary into single arm swings. I really enjoy hand-to-hand switch and single arm mace swings, but that is obviously a progression over a period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, obviously, so we talked about levers a little bit there, and so people can understand it's levers, just physics, talking about where the force is, where the fulcrum is, where the muscle action is. It was my least favorite part of my CSCS exam. Studying for that, I was like, first class lever, second class lever, just levers. God. But
I'm going to be doing CSCS next year.
I have so many recommendations for you. I just passed that. I was really freaked out about it. Took the test because they freak you out because they're like it's 60-70% first time failure rate. You're like, oh my gosh. And I got like a 90 on it. I was like, I'm not boasting. I'm not boasting, world. I'm just like, I was like, why was I so freaking out about this? But anyway, so talking about a lever, so you can kind of help explain the further something is away from the body, the heavier it feels. So if I take 10 pounds and I hold it right here, it just doesn't feel as heavy as if I hold it out here. And so when I have a lever, if I'm holding a handle, and you can kind of express to them what you were talking about. When you said that thing was chest high for you, the Jory.
Yep.
I was gonna get it, one of the letters. When you said the Jory was chest high for you and 26 pounds, I was like, holy Lord, like the centrifugal force that's being created with that is silly. Can you help people kind of understand why like something long and then heavy towards the end is so much harder to maintain?
It's like when, so sometimes, for example, because you have a steel mace, right?
Right.
If I'm teaching somebody or they come to me and they only own a steel mace and they're brand new or they've had very little instruction, they need to clean up their swings. I have them swing the steel mace and then have them swing the gata because the feedback is drastically different. So you have like either bamboo, which has some natural flex to it, and bamboo is not always perfectly straight.
Sure.
So depending on how you're holding it, it's like, oh, so there's that reflexive, feedback to the body. And even if it's a wood handle, all the weight is concentrated at the end of the lever. Versus with most steel maces, the handle, there's a bit of weight in the handle, but the feedback is completely different versus having the cement, and also the size of the lever. So for example, I just got this from India. It was a gift from the Great Indian Workout, which is so sweet. And this is the Hanuman Gata, and it's 20 pounds. But the end of the lever, even though it's short, this is a very large round here. So the feedback to swinging it is quite different just by the sheer size of the globe at the end of the lever. So that's why I think I end up having like such a large collection of clubs, and the 40 maces that I have now is because each one has its own like personality. Each one has its own feel. And the feedback to the body, even though it's the same tool, could be drastically different. And then for me, because I'm just like a junkie for this stuff, I'm like, whoa, there's so many possibilities. And then you could find kind of like, if, depending, like, because you and I like rotational movements, like when you mentioned like the rip trainer earlier, when you what's his name? Yes. Pete. So like, I remember when that first came out, like I still have my original TRX from the year it came out, and the rip trainer, the year that it came out, I got it because I've always loved kind of diving into movement through all planes of motion, and do that with these tools.
Yeah, that's so cool that you bring that up. And I've actually seen, because I'm close with Randy and Pete and everybody over at TRX, and Pete's not over at TRX anymore. He's doing Golf Forever now, which is really cool. By the way, if you get a chance, watch that episode, guys. I'm not a spokesperson. Very first episode of Full Swing on Netflix. They're working with the Golf Forever, like in their workout, and they're doing like rotational work with cables and stuff. And I'm like, yes, this is what all golfers should be doing. But anyway, long story short, I love that you can.
It's like we have a lot of
right.
There's so much more open. Like I've got a meeting with a golf pro coming up to work with some of the local golfers, getting stick mobility and circular training.
That's awesome.
It's kind of, it's fantastic. I feel.
Yeah. If you haven't checked out the What's That Strap as well, shout out to those dudes. Rotational training with that. Oh my God. I'm in love. Oh my gosh. And I'm in love with that strap. There's some interesting, you start exploring with that thing and exploring like spiral line and some of the move. I'm like, oh, I love this. My brain just exploded like yours did with the Gata. By the way, that Gata that you showed definitely looked like a Giant's bedpost. Just
Oh my
FYI. But that's so amazing. It gave that to you.
It's
So,
amazing.
so you just took 7 months though to get ready for kettlebell sport. Now
Yes.
we are going to have an episode on kettlebell sport that's going to be on here, but ultimately, like, can you tell people a little bit about what it was like to get ready for kettlebell sport as opposed to what your normal training was, and then what that meet was like for you?
Yep. So that was my sixth competition, but I hadn't been on the platform since 2019. And I come from a kettlebell hardstyle background. But years back, my coworker, he is from Lafayette. He wanted to start his own kettlebell sport company. And he came over, my son was a baby. So God, that's gotta be 13 years ago. And I helped translate from Russian to English, and him and his friend Alex started AKA. And I did not get on the platform or train for sport till a few years later. And I think my first competition was in 2016. And then I did 5. But I have to admit, like this last one, I felt like I was really committed to the training process. I think before I was doing it to kind of like just give it a go and to have fun and to travel and to help my friend out. This time around, I was like, okay, I have to really focus on my conditioning because I'm getting, I'm almost 44. Perimenopause has set in, awesome, and my body's changed. And they don't talk about a lot how your hormonal changes will affect you as an athlete. So I kind of really focused in on twice a week of my programming with my kettlebell coach, Jeff. He's up at RX Training in Boston. I had
No, Jeff, good dude.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's
good dude.
such a sweetheart. On one day a week was longer sets, kind of focused on time underneath the bells and accessory work. The second day was focused on intensity. So, shorter spurts. And I am not an endurance athlete by any means. If you want me to move your couch, I'm your girl. If it's like endurance, it is hard for me. And I wanted to refocus after the pandemic because it was, as the extrovert that I am, it was really hard being home and just kind of everything be flipped upside down. So I was like, I'm going to get back on the platform because my friend was training for it. And something just clicked this time where I felt really committed to the process. And it's a tough sport because I've also now developed only in the past 8 weeks, exercise-induced asthma. And that could come out of nowhere. I went to, the asthma doctor. I went to my primary care, my gynecologist, and my body's changing. And hormonal changes could trigger, exercise-induced asthma. And doing something like an endurance sport where you're doing mouth breathing, because I'm a nasal breather, typically when I train myself. In long cycle, I'm doing double bell is mouth breathing. So I started recently, just out of the blue, having an issue with that, but my performance was not really impacted. I lasted the 10 minutes. I got 84 reps, which I will take. I felt very in control and prepared for the event. And, I just feel proud of myself for like committing to it and getting it done. Cause it's a different bird. It's a tough sport. That repetition, my body does not like repetition. That's actually like, high volume overhead. That's one of the reasons why I also got into so much circular training years ago, even before I did kettlebell sport, is I was doing so much overhead. I loved that midline crossing. So it's a nice complement. I feel like the midline crossing helps my lockout. And I have, like a better connection to grip, like when to relax my grip on a kettlebell and when to kind of have a little bit more tension on the handle. So that's correlating with the circular training too. But now I'm just rambling, but I'm glad I did it. I'm going to compete in October again.
That's awesome. Now, can you explain to people what, so obviously it was 10 minutes of long cycle, correct? And can you just explain to people like what long cycle is? Because they're probably like, you just get on a bike and go like a really long way.
cycling along. Was
Are you cycling with one hand and doing snatches with the other hand with the kettlebell? Is that what kettlebell sport is?
at once. But you have the option to do single bell. I like double bell because I don't know if it's because I'm a Libra, but I'm like, I need that symmetry. I don't like having that offset like for high volume. So I do 2-arm long cycle, and I competed with double 12 kg. But my training load was 10, 12, 14, and 16s. So it's 2 kettlebells that you clean and then jerk overhead repetitively.
It's volume. It's volume. The previous host of the show, Aaron Guyette, shout out to Aaron. Love you, buddy.
Oh, yeah, he competed.
He did. Yeah. He actually owned a couple of American records, if I remember correctly. So Aaron is doing his thing in Idaho now. We miss him. We love him. I'm actually in a men's Bible study group that we meet every Sunday. So I get to talk to him all the time, which is awesome. From Orlando to Idaho, which is great. He literally just built his house from the ground up.
That's wild.
Like did it himself, like hired people as well. Like he's not just like Davy Crockett out there, like building a cabin, but shout out to Aaron, love him, miss him. But it's really like the grueling nature that is kettlebell sport and the volume that's associated with it in like short periods of time is just I'm like you. I'm like, I just did an anaerobic work. I like endurance like ish, like I like volumes of intervals. But if you're like, hey, we're going to do this thing for 10 minutes, I'm going to be like, what are we doing for 10 minutes?
And my heart rate gets so high in sport. Like it is ridiculous. I actually had like an EKG. I had echocardiogram and a stress test just to make sure. They're like, your heart is great. Your VO2 max is above normal. And I'm like, what? He's like, but I didn't know this is that like well, obviously women have like a smaller heart size, but like the heart formula is just completely wrong. Like I knew there was like room for error, but like I will get into the 190s, maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes in, and I could stay in the high like 190s for like my whole sport set. And I put the belt, I'm conversational, I could talk, I'm not lightheaded, I don't feel like I'm going to pass out. But like during my training, I was monitoring it with Lorna, and she's like, man, your heart rate is really high. Then I told Jeff, and he's like, your heart rate's really high. Then I went down the rabbit hole with like the cardiologist, and he's like, you're sitting here with a resting heart rate of 58.
Right. Like, yeah. That's the only thing that matters.
He's the only thing that matters. Everybody's different. And he's like, you're doing repetitive leg drive, and your legs drive the blood flow to the heart, which
peripheral heart action. Yeah.
But I wasn't like translating of why my heart rate was getting so high. So now I focus on like how quickly my heart can recover a minute after I put the bells down.
Sure.
And elite athlete is between like 50 and 60 beats per minute. And I recover around like 35 to 45 beats per minute. And, he said like, you're almost 44, but you're not like you've been an athlete your whole life. So the conditioning is different, so that was interesting. But I was like, man, it's kind of about sport is.
I'd also be really interested to see what your catecholamine levels are like when you first start, because like if we do something like we know, like when we react to something that we know is going to be like hard. Right. Yeah. Like I did a couple of CrossFit competitions, which is when you're 6'3", those are hard, but we are not meant to be gymnasts. Do not give me gymnastics thing to do. But like my heart rate would skyrocket really fast at the beginning. And then eventually I'd kind of level off. I'd get into it. And that was, at the time I didn't necessarily recognize what it was. And then when I started doing research and understanding what like my body's response to stress doesn't distinguish stress. Stress is stress to the body. And so, especially when we're exercising, that first dump of catecholamine, so all the different catecholamines, so you're talking about epinephrine and norepinephrine, basically survival stuff is going to skyrocket. And then if my perceived stress mentally is even greater because I'm like, this is going to be uncomfortable. This is going to suck. I don't know how I'm going to do this. It's even going to pump more when it first starts. And so you're going to get an even bigger dump from those catecholamines. And so I started like being conscious of like how I perceived things and like doing
Totally.
breath work beforehand. And I didn't have as big a spikes beforehand as I used to, but I hear you. Like people at home.
Same thing though. Jeff was like nailed it. He's like, he's like, I think you're like your stress response because you know it's
Mhm.
happening.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's
It
why
skyrockets. You jumps, your heart just goes because
wild.
it dumps in the system, and then your heart goes, okay, it's time to survive. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Send it everywhere. And then you add peripheral heart action to it, which, by the way, people at home, peripheral heart action is when your heart has to pump blood to the entire body, which is why we recommend full body exercises when you are trying to lose weight, because there's a greater caloric output from full body exercises because of peripheral heart action. Then it's going to skyrocket even more. So it's this very interesting phenomena. And
Dove down the rabbit hole.
oh man, that rabbit hole is deep.
Oh my gosh.
What's even deeper about that rabbit hole is that when you start thinking about your heart rate and all that acceleration and stuff,
Makes it
and then
worse.
somebody's like, "Oh my gosh, you're doing so much cardio," and you're like, "No, no, that's not how this works. Like, here's the rabbit hole. Go down it. Like, that's not how this works." So we have a whole episode dedicated to that coming up, which I'm
Oh
excited
my gosh,
about.
you have to like send a
Yes,
text and
yes,
let me know
yes,
because
I
I
will.
was just like fascinated by it. I was like picking the
Mhm.
cardiologist was so funny. He's like,
Yeah, cardio is something we are doing all the time,
yeah,
everybody. The day you stop doing cardio is a very bad day. Okay. We just have different energy systems we're trying to optimize whenever we're training. And if you want your aerobic system to get better, which we all need, and there's a lot of really big health benefits to having a robust aerobic system,
yeah.
supersetting exercises is not going to build a robust aerobic system. That's not the way this works.
Hydro. I got a hydro rowing machine like during April of 2020, and then we have a spinning bike in our bedroom. And so, steady state cardio, the cardio intervals,
Mhm.
like
That's where it is. I mean,
yeah,
that's just, we know that's the way the system works. It responds with mitochondrial density and O2 uptake when we
yeah,
do steady state moderate to or high levels of aerobic output. So like, let's say I run a sprint, but then I do a really short volume rest to then go back and do it again. Then I'm going to get some of that optimal. That's what kind of Tabata was. And by the way, Tabata for exercise is not going to robust your aerobic system. Doing push-ups Tabata isn't going to make you aerobically stronger. He did all that stuff on a bike, and they were doing other stuff at the same time. And I could do an entire episode on Tabata. I might. I'm getting the itch right now. I might do it.
Have you
Can
heard
you
of the expand along?
what?
Have you heard of the expand along?
Mm-mm.
I bought that to help me. It's I guess like a lot of like triathletes use it, and you slow breathe inhale and exhale into it, and you could kind of like change it to kind of like restrict
Mm.
air flow, so you
Okay.
like strength and endurance in your lungs. So I was doing that. I stopped doing it, and I'm like, I probably should go back to using that again. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna get back into using it because I think that'll really help me with like the
And definitely check out, if you haven't already, check out Oxygen Advantage, Dr. Patrick McCown. If you don't know who he is,
I
OA Oxygen Advantage. We're actually hoping, I've already talked to his people. We're hoping to have Patrick on the show, which is going to
awesome.
be awesome. And so we can talk a little bit about the benefits of nasal breathing. But he does some very deep dives on exercise-induced asthma. He talks about it very, very
The
exclusively.
kettlebell sport is like the mouth breathing. So
Yeah.
I start to freaking like hyperventilate.
Yeah, and so he does a lot of talking, and everybody. So we're talking about mouth breathing. They're like, "What? You're supposed to breathe with your mouth?" No, that's not the way that works. We'll talk about that another time.
But it's
But
interesting, the sports performance. So definitely flag me on that one too.
yeah, I will. That one's going to be
I
good
tried
because
nasal.
he coaches soccer football players,
Yeah,
football players across the world, and teaches them how to nasal breathe while they're at high levels of aerobic intensity. He teaches, like, that's part of the teaching, is like teaching somebody how not to mouth breathe during high levels of like aerobic intensity. So football players, cricket that he's worked with a lot of MMA fighters, which I think is really cool, because that, from an aerobic challenging sport, you have no idea until you've tried to step in a ring and do a 1 minute with somebody what
it's
aerobically challenging is.
the bells overhead, like because you wait,
Mm-hmm.
the bells are wrapped on the hips. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I tried nasal breathing in long cycle,
So
but
hard,
I
right?
need strength and energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, I'm gonna have to just, I don't know, I'm gonna have to just play around with it.
You're gonna have to go down your own new rabbit hole. That's what you're gonna have
Yeah,
to
I
do.
mean, I mainly nasal breathe in most of my training.
Yeah,
For kettlebell sport.
and we see that.
Mhm.
So people at home, if they want to find out more about Kelly or how to work with Kelly, or maybe when Kelly's doing a workshop, how would they do that?
So I do have actually quite a few workshops coming up. I've got June 3rd with my friend Monica in the Philadelphia area in Morrisville at Remedy Fitness. That's Indian clubs and mace. And the following weekend, June 10th, I'll be back in Weymouth, Massachusetts at MSC Strength. That is Indian club and mace, and it's like an extension of the previous workshop that I did months back there. But even beginners are welcome at that one. Then I fly out to LA July 15th and 16th. I think that's the dates for Indian Club workshops there. And during the pandemic, I collaborated with Original Strength and I created my own course, viewing circular training through the OS lens. And that course I'm going to be doing on Friday, September 8th, down at Original Strength in North Carolina.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
by the way, if you're watching this at home, this is for 2023, in case you watch this on YouTube in 2024
Good
or
point.
beyond. Dates in 2023. So please don't show up to LA in summer of 2024. Like, where are you, Kelly? You said you were going to be here. How would they find, where would they, if they want to find this information, where would they go to find all this stuff?
So it all depends on where the link. So in my
It all depends is Kelly's answer for everything today.
So it's on Kel's Bells 88 on Instagram. I have some of it linked on my website, Kelly Manzone. But then my email, kelly@kmmoves.com. I do put out occasionally an email blast where
Nice.
So people can join my email list. I'm not very tech savvy. I can't do it all, but I try to get all that stuff out. But
well, you're right. You're right on the crust of that generation that was like seeing all the tech stuff happening, and you could either embrace it or you were like, no, like
it's so
analog
hard
telephone.
I just like, I'm a dinosaur. I love pen and paper and the tactility of things. But I'm figuring it out slowly. And you're like a one, man show, when it's like one person managing it all. There's only so much bandwidth.
Yes, you're not wrong. That's why I'm thinking about hiring somebody to do the things that I don't want to do.
I know. That's why I'm doing that.
Yeah. Kelly, thank you for being on the show today. We learned a lot about circular training. We learned a lot about, the way you train, that kettlebell sports, that experience that you just had. I look forward to seeing more from you on social media. And, you come down to this wonderful place called Orlando.
I'm sorry. I didn't
attend the workshop
that way. It's difficult sometimes. I was there the year, there was 3 hurricanes.
Oh yes, I was in college that year. That was a fun year.
I had to come.
For those of you at home, there was a time where 3 hurricanes came through Central Florida, literally one right after the other after the other. I was up at school at Florida State University, and so my parents lost power. They lost everything, and they asked me to come home and remove things like debris and help and that sort of stuff. And I left air-conditioned rooms in Tallahassee to come down to no air conditioning and remove debris. I love you guys so much, and I hope you understand how much I love you that I was willing to do that. So Kelly, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being on the show.